You had to stand at NRL HQ today before addressing the media and announcing that the competition will be shut down indefinitely, but you also had to address your own staff and tell them they're all off on leave at the moment, annual leave until May 1. How's this all sitting with you tonight as you absorb what you have been through and what the game is going through?
Oh, look, thanks, Brace. Look, I think Gus summed it up pretty well. It's a big day and a really difficult day for our industry. Peter V'landys and I have fought extremely hard over the last 2 or 3 weeks together to keep our games on the field in order to keep our industry afloat. But unfortunately today we came to the end of the runway and we had no choice but to suspend the competition. Let's hope we can get it back at some point during this season. But what we're facing here is much, much bigger than rugby league. It's much, much bigger than the rugby league industry. This is a very significant global issue that's now right in the middle of our country, and we have to make sure we keep each other safe. So the game's decision today was really the only one that we could make.
Todd, I was speaking to the NRL as late as 3 o'clock today, and I was being told then the season was still on. What happened by 6 o'clock for the season to be off?
Well, you're right, Danny. As at 3 o'clock, we were still marching ahead, pushing ahead with everything we could to keep round 3 on. I've been in constant contact with our Chief Medical Officer, but more importantly, our independent expert around biosecurity, as Peter V'landys has mentioned a few times today in the media conference. And we got our update today, and that independent advice was very different, and it turned a very significant corner. And we've been saying all along that the decisions we make have to be by the experts and will be guided by those experts. And that advice was quite simple, that this is spreading much quicker than anyone had anticipated. And we were now putting the players at risk, and we weren't prepared to do that. And we had to make sure the players' safety was first. We've been saying that all along. We've also been saying that if we need to change and pivot, we will. And unfortunately, that moment came to us today.
That's a big change on what you were saying that the experts were saying last Friday. They felt that the game was free to keep going while ever the players were healthy, and they felt that they could continue to play. Here it is 3 days later, and suddenly they've given you information that says, no, you've got to suspend it straight away. What was the change in that information?
Yeah, I mean, Gus, it was even up to the point of yesterday. I had a phone call yesterday with our experts on Sunday at lunchtime, and even at that point in time, we were very confident we could continue. I think what we've seen over the last 24 to 48 hours with both the federal government and the Prime Minister last night, state governments again today, locking down of the Queensland borders, this continued spread, particularly here in New South Wales, is creating enormous angst. And I think we've got to understand that we're a small part in a much bigger problem, and we had to play our part. Now, Peter and I would have loved to have continued our games. We would have loved to have got to round 3, because we feel a huge responsibility to our industry to keep it going. The decision we've made today to suspend our games will affect many, many people, both inside the game and outside the game. So there's a tremendous amount of gratitude from us for the support we've been given from our players and supporters, but it didn't fill us with any joy to make the announcement today. But as I said, Gus, it was probably the only one we could make.
Todd, what limitations are there around players and clubs training throughout this time, if they are allowed to at all? I mean, if the season is suspended for 4, 6, 8, 10 weeks, however long it may be, to get the players back on the field playing, it's going to take an amount of time. You can't just expect them to have 5 or 6 weeks off and go back the next week and start playing.
No, that's a fair point, Gal. You're right. I mean, obviously we're mapping out a number of scenarios, and what we're looking at is, if we can get ourselves to a point where we know that there's a start date for the premiership again, we will have to effectively establish a period before that as some form of mini pre-season. We're going to have to work on that with the RLPA and all our clubs. But you're right, if the players go into a break at the moment, we're going to have to reset the preparation for the next part of the season. And look, none of us know the answers to that, Gal. None of us have a crystal ball on when we think we can get back to playing. What I do know from talking to the expert today is that I think we can expect it to get a lot worse, particularly here in New South Wales in the coming weeks. I think we're going to experience some things that we've never experienced in our city before. And that's not good for any of us, for our families, for our friends, or for our sport. But once we get through that period, I'm sure Rugby League will come out the other side and we'll be ready to go again.
And just on the players, were the RLPA involved in these decisions? And have any players been spoken about having to take pay reductions or pay cuts over the coming months?
Well, first of all, yeah, the players were heavily engaged today. We sat with Clint Newton for a number of hours in NRL HQ, so we've been having dialogue with Clint and the Players Association throughout this whole episode. I've got to say that Clint's handled himself admirably, and as have all the senior players in understanding and communicating with us. So hats off to all the players in very distressing times. In relation to player salaries, I mean, we've gone into this collective bargaining agreement with very much a partnership between the game and the players, and we've always said a percentage of revenue. So if revenue goes up, the players get a share in that, but equally when the revenue goes down, the players have to accept their share of that as well. And I said this today and I stand by it, that this will be a significant industry-wide cut on the costs. Every single part of the industry will feel this, me included, everyone at NRL headquarters, players, clubs, state leagues, participation. We're all going to feel some pain through this, but that will ultimately help us get to the other side.
Todd, you speak about the hope of being able to resume this competition at some time in the near future or some extended time. But what's going to determine that? What is going to be the point where they can say, OK, now you can resume? Is it when a vaccine is found? Is it when there are no further infections? Because once they've shut it down, I can't see this stopping until the virus stops.
Yeah, look, Gus, it's a fair question. It's something that's concerned us and why we've tried so hard to retain our games on the field. And I've been talking to my counterparts in other sports, as you'd expect me to. And that's our greatest fear, is once we've stopped, how do we get ourselves back onto the field? How do we get our sport reignited? How do we get our players back on the field? And I'm not sure I can stand here tonight and genuinely answer that question with any sincerity or with any clarity.